Hi again. Um, I'm going to explain a little about uh, the case and Brett Jones. Um, he was barely 15 years old, just turned 15, a couple weeks before um, he was attacked by a mentally ill man in a rage and defended himself. Um, and the man was his grandfather, where Brett had been staying and was planning on staying for the school year. This happened in the summer of 2004, when Brett had just turned 15 in July, and this attack happened August 9th. Uh, Brett turned 15 on July 17th, and on August 9th, he was attacked unprovoked by his grandfather, of which he had to defend himself. It was, uh, as Brett said, one of us was going to die, and it wasn't going to be me. Um, and the whole thing happened in about a minute. And so Brett grabbed a knife off the counter where he'd been making a sandwich, and ended up killing his grandfather to get him off of him. And he had him in a chokehold, of which he was losing his breath. He was unable to breathe. And that's how he ended up stabbing his grandfather. And he died of his injuries. Um, and the sandwich with one bite taken out of it was found on the table. Um, and Brett tried to save his grandfather's life. He tried to give him CPR, and he died in his arms. Um, and Brett was just devastated, covered in blood, in his mouth, in his hair, all over him, trying to save his grandfather's life. Um, but that's the premise. That's the in a nutshell what happened that day. And then after he saw that his grandfather wasn't going to make it or had died, he moved him into an area where he thought the wild dogs and animals around their property wouldn't um, get at him. So he put him in a spot um, in the carport, and closed a door so that the body would be safe in there. He went to get his grandmother. His first idea, you got to remember, this is an eighth grader, was to go and get his grandmother in Tupelo. They lived outside Tupelo in Shannon, Mississippi. So they were going to somehow get a ride into Tupelo to get his grandmother, who was working at Walmart, and tell her what happened. Well, so of course all that was used against him. But So originally, Brett was living with his mom in Jupiter, Florida, with his brother. His mom and dad were divorced, and he to get him away from this abusive stepfather, um, his mom decided to send him to Mississippi to live with his dad. Um, and his dad had, he's had a lot of issues, drinking, drugs. I would say he's a full-fledged alcoholic. Um, and But anyway, he had, even done time at Parchman for third offense DUI. And so this man had a very bad drinking problem, and he also did drugs. So this is where Brett was going to go live. But his father, Tony Jones, was living at his grandparents' house. So that's where Brett was sent to go to live. Well, his grandfather didn't want him there. He didn't want any teenagers there. He didn't want any kids there. He was, um, the evidence that I uncovered, which was never presented at trial, was his grandfather had mental health issues. He was going downhill and becoming aggressive, and had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from his time in Vietnam, serving in the Vietnam War. And so he was becoming aggressive and violent. Um, and his wife, Brett's grandmother, Madge Jones, tried to get help for him many times, but this man would not go see a doctor about anything. He was diagnosed with depression at one time and post-traumatic stress disorder at one time, but he just refused to get help at this point in his life. And they tried to take him. He jumped out of the car. He was becoming, people were saying he was crazy. Literally, people were saying he was crazy. His wife said he was crazy. And she tried to get the minister from her church to talk to him. And, they tried a lot of things. But anyway, unbeknownst to Brett or his mother, that all of this was going on with the grandfather, Burtis Jones, they sent Brett there. And of course, he's an 8th grader, right? Anybody who's had kids knows 8th grade was one of the hardest years with kids, girls, boys, just teenagers in general. It was kind of the breakout year for all kinds of sort of bad behavior. So that would have been a very terrible time for Brett to go live there with his grandparents. And his grandmother was okay with it. She had a part-time job at Walmart. I think she worked from 3 till 11 or something like that. Burtis didn't work anymore. He was a car mechanic, but I don't think he was working anymore. And then Tony lived there. Tony fixed sewing machines. He had a very special skill. He had skills that were kind of old school to fix these old sewing machines. So he always had work, that way. But he also drank, so how he did all this, I don't know. He was a functional alcoholic, apparently. And the place he was working at the time this happened, Tupelo Sewing, they paid him on Monday because they paid him cash on Monday, because if they paid him on Friday, he would spend it all drinking. And so they did not show up to work on Monday. So, but because he was a valued employee, because he could fix these old sewing machines that nobody else knew how to do, they put up with a lot of stuff from Tony. And but one of the things they did to ensure he would show up is paid him cash on a Monday. So I thought that was kind of funny. And I got that information directly from the woman who supervised him at Tupelo Sewing. And, but they liked Tony and, whatever. But, Brett was pretty much dumped on his grandparents there. So he was planning on starting the school year at the school there in Shannon, high school. He was planning on starting high school. He was going to be a freshman. So the day, and a little sideshow, and this proves to me about 8th grade, that age, right? 14, going on 15, whatever. His little friend from Jupiter, who lived in the apartment complex, who also, she had a lot of issues too. Her mother was abusive towards her, as was Brett's stepfather. And, I mean, he was very abusive, this man. But anyway, this little girl that was also in 8th grade lived there with her mother. They were from the Philippines. And apparently her dad was, during the war, had gotten this woman pregnant and brought her back to the United States from Vietnam, from the Philippines, um, and abandoned her. And so she had this kid, Michelle. And her and Brett became good friends because they related to each other, both being from abusive homes and not having their real father and just stuff like that. So they became good friends. Well, when Brett was shipped off to Mississippi and didn't have any of his friends anymore, they called a lot. And it was very expensive. And Brett didn't know that, how expensive it was. He thought they had net 10 because his mother did, but they didn't. So anyway, that's another little... so one day this girl calls Brett and she says, I'm coming to Mississippi. I'm coming to stay with you. So, he's kind of like, well, how's that going to work? And he said, well, apparently, before he could really just say, nah, not really good idea. She was on a bus. She left her home in Florida in the middle of the night on a Greyhound bus that, I don't know where the money came from to get this ticket. I've heard things like Brett sent her his birthday money, something like that. And so he said, yeah, then all of a sudden I get a phone call. She's at the bus depot in Tupelo. So he can't drive. He's not old enough. So he corrals his cousin, I think it was Josh Jones, to go pick her up at the bus station. So anyway, here's this girl that nobody tried to find out where she was. Nobody called the house. Nobody. Imagine Tony and the grandfather claimed they didn't know this girl was there. Brett was apparently hiding her, with other people. She would stay with other people, or she would stay out in this abandoned fish house in the back or in the woods, or he would sneak her into the house sometimes if nobody was home. And so anyway, things started to come to a head because Brett was starting school the day after his grandfather was killed. That was going to be the first day of school, and he didn't know what to do with Michelle. Michelle was still there, and he was trying to talk to his grandmother about it. What should we do with her? But he just couldn't get the nerve up. But Madge has since told me, I knew something was on his mind. He was following me around the house like he wanted to tell me something, So anyway, she was still there when this all happened, which was easy for the prosecutor then to take advantage of that, which they sure did. But anyway, when on August 9th, they were going to go school supply shopping. I guess they wait till the last day in Mississippi to go get school supplies. But they were going to go school supply shopping for Brett to start high school. So they were going to go to Walmart where Madge worked, his grandmother. And so they were all, Brett was excited about going, and he changed his clothes, and they were going to go at 4 o'clock because they were going to pick up Tony at the Tupelo sewing. Pick him up because he was going to pay for the supplies, and all that. So shortly before 4 o'clock, Brett changed his clothes, and because he didn't want to embarrass his grandmother, he wanted to look nice when he went to her place of employment. So he was ready to go, and he was in the kitchen making a sandwich because he hadn't had lunch. That's when his grandfather came in and literally attacked him. He was mad. He was mad about something. He was mad, apparently, that he tried calling Tony at work to make sure he was there, and because Tony wasn't all that reliable. And nobody answered. So he got mad, and he started, yelling up to Brett about his dad being a loser, a drug addict, an alcoholic, out with his drug buddies. He's not at work. Well, nobody really knew that. It just that nobody answered the phone, which later on, when I did my investigation, I found out why. But so Brett sassed back in defense of his, parents. And his grandfather lost it and went berserk. And it appeared like he was having a post-traumatic stress disorder episode. The way Brett described his eyes and his face and how it looked to him. And when we look that up in the book of mental illness, that was exactly the description. So anyway, it looked like Burtis was in a full-blown episode, and he had Brett around the neck. And Brett was sliding. He was in a corner of the kitchen, this very small kitchen, and he couldn't get around this man. And Burtis was a big man, and he had him, in a chokehold. Brett said he was slipping down the cabinet and ready to basically lose consciousness when he grabbed the knife that he had made the sandwich with, of which I said the sandwich was sitting there, so that was a real story. So his grandfather basically ambushed him as he was eating the sandwich at the counter. And so, a brawl ensued. And Brett said he had no choice. He had to end up trying to get his grandfather to let go and get off of him. And that's when most of the stab wounds were little jabs, which to me were warnings, like but then he literally ended up stabbing him enough for him to bleed to death. He died of his injuries, but he stumbled out of the kitchen. He let go of Brett. He stumbled out of the kitchen into this carport area. And when Brett was able to get his breath back and get up, he followed his grandfather out there and tried to save his life. And, one of the most heartbreaking things that he told me was that when he was cradling his grandfather and he's screaming and yelling for help. He didn't have a phone there, but he was trying CPR and screaming for help. His grandfather, as he was dying, said, "Hey, Brett, I'm sorry." He apologized to Brett for what happened. He said, "I'm sorry." And then he died. It's just heartbreaking. And, like I said, Brett dragged this man over to the car, to a safe spot. I think they were outside the carport, when all this happened, where Burtis ended up. So we dragged him in there and closed him into a closed area so that the dogs and wild animals around their property, they lived in the woods, wouldn't do anything to the body while he left to go get his grandmother and tell her what happened. So, and Michelle was there when this all happened, although she supposedly wasn't anywhere around. She was in the backwoods in her little fish house where she was staying or something like that. And Brett was going to Walmart, so she knew he was leaving anyway to get his school supplies. So this was no planned out murder, as the state tried to say, that he planned this out. It was a plot he came up with Michelle, his little 8th grade girlfriend. It was a plot and a plan and a scheme, and they were going to hurt this man because, supposedly Burtis found Michelle in the house, something 8th graders do all the time, have girls in the house, So apparently, according to the state, that's enough for a boy to kill his grandfather, that he had a girl in the house. Something Brett had no history of violence, no history of anything like that. But anyway, she was still there, so they were able to really twist the whole thing. But she wasn't around because they were leaving to go get school supplies. And but she came out and from wherever she was, and they both left. He explained what happened, and they both left to go get Madge at Walmart. And of course, the state twisted that. He was fleeing the scene of the crime, fleeing, um, you know. So every single thing he did and said came all the way back on him. Uh, and, Brett, he gave a statement at midnight in the police department all alone. And he did describe self-defense. That's what he described in his statement. But he used a lot, as a kid, he said things that he would have no idea could come back and be twisted against him. And so, that's what happened. So he never saw the light of day after that. They arrested him and brought him to the station, interrogated him, threatened him with the death penalty. He didn't know he was too young for the death penalty, so that scared him, and he gave a statement. So, it was just a tragedy, a horrible, horrible tragedy. Brett loved his grandfather. He loved his grandfather and his grandmother, and they were decent people. Neither one of them drinks. Neither one of them have any criminal history. Neither one of them, Madge is a devout Christian. And this is who Gardner said is incredible. She'd been married to the man for 40 years, but I guess didn't know him, and wasn't credible. And then Tony, of course, the son, also. Both him and Madge testified that this man was already acting violently and overreacting to things and attacking, Madge and stuff like that. And they testified at our hearing. Brett's lawyer wasn't interested in talking to them at all, finding out anything. So I was the one that talked to them and found out this information that was jaw-dropping. Why wouldn't that have been in the trial? Because this was Brett's story, that he was attacked by this man who was pissed off, really in a rage. And they didn't bother. He didn't bother. The lawyer didn't bother. Didn't do anything. He thought he was going to get a plea deal or something, so he didn't bother to do any work. So when we had gotten the affidavits from them, the Mississippi Supreme Court overturned the conviction. But unfortunately, Brett's lawyer didn't know what to do with it. And went back to the trial judge with it. And I don't think that was the route to go, because nothing in the court order stated that she had to do that at all. So we feel like that was the big turning point. That was the roadblock for the rest of the appeals that we were forced into after that. And so it's just been a tragedy the whole way around. Everything. And but all of the evidence adds up to what Brett said happened. It all makes sense that that's what happened. And in fact, if you read the trial transcripts, the state's case is it's made up out of whole cloth. And Michelle, they got her. She was their star witness. She turned her against Brett, and she obviously made up some testimony. Whether the prosecutors knew that or not, it would be a NAPU violation. I don't know. I'm pretty sure they did. And anyways, they didn't correct it, which is part of the NAPU case. You have to correct that. She was, cross-examined and recanted her testimony that she heard Brett say he was going to hurt his grandfather earlier in the day. That never happened. And she admitted that she was just trying to get home. She wanted to get home to Florida. They had been holding her for 9 months in a detention center, this 8th grade child who's missed a whole year of school and everything, until she changed her story. That's why the trial took so long. It took 9 months. They're waiting for her to change her story. And that's what she did. I think her guardian ad litem talked her into doing that to save herself or something, because they were going to charge her with accessory after the fact, which was a 5-year sentence, which, they wouldn't have been able to do that anyway if she would have testified truthfully. So anyway, that's what happened. And Brett's mom told me that during the trial, they had lunch together one day in the back. And he said to his mom, hey, Mom, I should have let Grandpa kill me because of what everyone's going through now. This is an 8th grade child. I should have let Grandpa kill me. So the whole case is extremely heartbreaking, and I stand by Brett's innocence, and I have pronounced his innocence every day that I've been able to. And he's claimed innocence since day one. He pled. He went to trial saying he was innocent, and it was self-defense. And when he got to federal court and claimed innocence, they said, no, you never claimed that. Except he did from day one. From his first day of trial, he claimed innocence, but it wasn't good enough for the courts. So that's we stand by that every day and always will. And Brett's last lawyer, who he had from the MacArthur Justice Center, agreed with me. He was railroaded. But they wouldn't defend him. They wouldn't take that conviction up because they say they can't. And I find that to be, a place like MacArthur Justice Center that can't take on a wrongful conviction of a child. What kind of place are you if you can't do that? And he knew that. And the problem with the Miller stuff was his lawyers were parading him around as a murderer that needed a new sentence. That's kind of what it came down to, and, Brett and I just went along with it because, it's better to get released through the back door if that's all you've got, and the lawyers just kept saying, oh, this will work. You'll get parole eligibility, this fighting this convictions is slim and none and all this stuff. And, so in order to do the Miller stuff, he had to be guilty. That's how Miller worked. You were a kid who did this stuff, but you were had improved yourself. You had done good things in prison, and you deserved parole eligibility. So Brett had to be this guy who committed this crime, and he just deserved a new sentence. Not that he was wrongfully convicted in the first place. So that was kind of how his lawyers treated him, that they paraded him around as a murderer at the Supreme Court. And, of course, we lost that bad because the new Trump court, but in a way, it didn't even start out very genuine. But we understood what the lawyers were doing. We understood that was, you have to go with what you've got if you're looking at your whole life locked up. You've got to do what you think is going to get you the hell out of there, get you the fuck out of there. And so, of course, we all went along with it. But that part really hurts, that he had to be paraded around like that as some guilty party. So anyway, there's a lot to it. There's a lot to the hearings. There's a lot more to talk about, but it's so time consuming, and I don't know if anybody wants to listen to this stuff, and I understand it. It's been going on for so long. There's so much information, and it's mind-boggling. So I understand people don't want to listen to all this and try to get his story out. But I'm going to try to continue to make videos. I think these are the long ones because you're starting from scratch to try to explain the story. But then, there's other little things that I can add and make shorter videos of some of the proceedings and how they went, which I would like to do. So I hope people will try to get interested in this case, and maybe some publicity would help. I don't know if there's still some jurors out there that are alive. This happened 20 years ago. I don't know how old the jurors were at the time, but that might be interested in knowing that this is what they were bamboozled. They were bamboozled by the state, the judge who allowed this hack of a trial this dog and pony show, and all of the appeals afterwards, denying Brett his constitutional rights to a fair trial and due process. And I don't think the jurors would be too happy to find out that the man who Brett said attacked him actually did attack him. The mother, the father, and the grandmother, the wife of the deceased and the son of the deceased, both said this man attacked my son and grandson. They had no doubt in their mind. And I have a lot in the stuff that is in the affidavits, details about stuff that he did to back that up. And if I was a jury, I would be furious that this was not presented to me as part of the case, and Madge to go up on the stand, which she wanted to do. So, I don't know. We're kind of at a place where things are at a standstill, and we're kind of dead in the water. We don't really have anything left, and everyone's abandoned us. All the lawyers are gone. They've ghosted us or just said bye, sayonara. Have a nice life. In fact, Brett's last lawyer said, we'll just plow through. So he's done 21 years since he was 15, barely. He's got 30 more to go. Plow through. That was his, encouraging words to Brett after everything collapsed and we lost everything except that 2008 court order, which to me was valid and still is valid, from the Mississippi Supreme Court, that overturned his conviction before all the shenanigans started. So we still have that. What it's good for, I have no idea. But anyway, okay. Thanks for listening, and I really mean that.